on the 20th. Now that is a Monday. I am perfectly willing to wait until you guys get back on the Wednesday after break, whichever one you would prefer.
You're gonna
What
be
was the
gone
first option?
in Wyoming that
The Monday before break of Thanksgiving.
And I personally don't want something weighing me during break.
So I'll give it to you on that. We'll plan to do it on the day that it's scheduled. I'll be ready.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to worry about it over Thanksgiving. You can go home and celebrate Thanksgiving in that your test is finished. So we'll do it on the 20th. It is a Monday, but you'll do it on that Monday. So anyway, we'll be ready to go. That's when it's scheduled, so I'm not making any change. And so let's have prayer and then we'll start. Father, your presence is with us, and we pray that you will guide and direct each of us as we finish out this unit. Be with us as we teach, as I teach, and as we all learn together, and that your hand will guide and direct us in this time of learning. We pray for your special grace and blessing on each one of us. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So now we're going to learn a new term, manifest destiny. Now this is a political theory that we Americans had, that we had the right, more than the right. It was our national mission to control the continent. And we are now moving west into other territories. And so, territorial expansion and the Mexican War, and the Mexican War is very much a part of this. Now, the first part of our territorial expansion actually takes place before the great period of manifest destiny, but it would still have something to do with it. There is the disputed territory here of the Webster-Ashburn Treaty. Ashburn, oh, by the way, this is a French map. I found this out later because all the words in it are French. So it must be from a French-Canadian textbook, but I pulled it off the web, and it does work. This is the area that is territoire dispute, disputed territory. This purple line was the line that we Americans claim should be the northern border of Maine. And the Canadians, the British, were saying that it's this red line. And there was a lumberjack war. You get lumberjacks that know how to swing an axe good, getting into a fight with each other, swinging axes at each other. That has to be stopped. So our Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister of Great Britain got together and drew a line. And now the northern border of Maine is this. And pretty much we got most of the territory of what we wanted. We still would not have been all the way to the St. Lawrence River, but the Gaspé Peninsula would almost be cut off from Great Britain. So it does create a big difference for the ability of Quebec to control that area. So it does make a difference. Another issue that took place was called the Caroline Incident. The British troops burned the USS Caroline in U.S. waters. America retaliated and arrested Canadian deputy sheriff for the death of Amos DeFree in the attack of the Caroline. An international incident was avoided when the Canadian deputy sheriff was acquitted, when the Americans employed the press and the American government wanted him to be found innocent of this murder so he could go free to Canada. If he had been convicted, there might have been war. Then there is the Creole affair, a slave revolt during an interstate marine slave trade in which slaves were sent to the British Bahamas. And then the the Webster-Ashburn Treaty is the final thing setting this border. So that is important. The next important thing is our involvement with Texas. Now, you don't have a map here. We'll get to a map here in a few minutes. But Texas was part of the Spanish Empire in the New World. John Adams and Oñez, the foreign minister of Spain, worked out a deal in 1819. This treaty said that the Spanish would give the United States Florida in exchange for a deal that the United States would never try and take Texas from them. That was a good deal for all concerned. Unfortunately, in 1820, Mexico gets their independence from Spain. And therefore, the United States believed that they had no deal with Mexico not to try and make designs on Texas from them. They just had a deal that they would not try and take it from Spain. So now that deal was off. We had Florida, and we are going to try to go for Spain. Stephen F. Austin, this man right here, is the father of Texas, and will go there as a settler. Now, Americans, after Mexico becomes independent, Americans are encouraged to settle in Texas. 4,600 area land grants are given. These were the only things you had to agree to if you wanted to move to Texas. If you're in favor of this, you can raise your hand. Become a Catholic. Do not have slaves. And obey Mexican laws. So if you're willing to do those three things, become Catholic, have no slaves, obey Mexican laws, you are welcome in Texas. The problem was, many Americans will go there who do not agree to follow these rules. Guess what they were? Illegal immigrants. Going from America into Texas. There is a sense that there was a illegal immigration, and many of them would bring slaves with them. And when they got there, many of the slaves expected to be set free because in Mexico, slavery was illegal. Mexicans that settled in Texas were called Tejanos. Mexico will emancipate its slaves in 1829. Now, one of these American illegal immigrants, Hayden Edwards, tried to briefly establish a breakaway republic called the Republic of Fredonia that was suppressed by Stephen Austin, this man, and other Anglo citizens that had moved there that were willing to follow the laws that had been established by the Mexican government. So they were at that time trying to be loyal to Mexico. Now, the Texas Revolution. Texas will revolt against Mexican control because of two things that are going on. One, there is a growing number of Americans living there, enough that the divided loyalty between Mexico and the United States was getting to be too large. Also, Mexico decides that they are going to merge Texas with another state in Mexico, because Mexico had a similar system like the United States. It was a federalized republic with various states. Mexico decided to merge Texas with another state in order to dilute the influence of the American settlers in Texas. And this really got the Texans upset. And therefore, there is a sense that there needs to be a revolution. Also, Santa Anna will become the new president of Mexico. Now, when Santa Anna was a governor of a state, he was a federalist. He was a person who believed in states' rights and did not want to be told what to do by the federal government of Mexico. He was a determined federalist. Guess what? When he became president of Mexico, the whole country, do you think he believed any longer in states' rights and that the governors of the states don't have to listen to him? No. Now he became a nationalist. He was a Santa Annaist. Wherever he happened to be at the moment, that's where the center of power was. So when he was a governor, the president of Mexico better not tell him anything. But when he became the president of Mexico, he wanted to tell all the governors what to do. And so there will be a series of campaigns, not just with Texas, but other provinces too. But Texas is the most important because it had the biggest sense of nationalism and collectivism, and therefore they will attack. Now here is the basic layout of this law. There's a great little book in the library about the war with Mexico and the Alamo and what's going on there. 187 men under the command of William B. Travis, who was a famous fighter, fought to the death at the Alamo. William B. Travis, though, does not really die in the fighting. He does die, and he is killed. But he was suffering from tuberculosis, and it is likely that he was shot while in his bed. Now, the Mexicans wrote in a journal that he was cowering in his bed under the sheets. That is probably not true. He was probably too ill to get up, suffering from tuberculosis. So if he got a shot off, maybe. Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, the famous Bowie knife man, he also dies there. Davy Crockett is thought to have been killed either during the battle or executed as a prisoner afterward. And you know Davy Crockett, you know, king of the wild frontier with a coonskin cap and so forth. I've been to his birthplace in Tennessee. He had been a U.S. congressman and will be defeated in the 1836 election for Congress and then goes to Mexico. Why? Because one of the best ways to become a well-known politician is to be a founding father of a new country. So he goes there on purpose and is swept up in the Alamo. Texas will declare its independence on March 2nd. Sam Houston, commander of the army, but they are not there. They will get there later. Santa Anna is then captured. They don't even know who he is at first. They capture him, and then they find out he's Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto, which is after this, and this is when Texas will get its independence. This is a visual picture of Davy Crockett fighting at the end to the death. It is not likely that that is the case. He was not a good, just because he was an excellent hunter of wild beasts doesn't mean he was an excellent soldier, because most bear or raccoons do not shoot back. So that's a whole different ball game. You can be an excellent hunter and not be very good at fighting in a war.
Independence. That is right. Nothing but entire separation from the Mexicans.
The idea was, let's have a republic. That republic may exist on its own, or it can always fall back to the United States and become one of the states.
Thousands of independence-minded Americans took up arms and marched for Texas. Many of the Texan fighters who took San Antonio de Bejar returned to their homes after the battle. Thought was given to abandoning the Alamo. As rebel forces organized under a provisional government, Jim Bowie was assigned in January 1836 to inspect the Alamo to consider demolishing the cannon ramps and other fortifications Mexican soldiers had built inside the mission. Davy Crockett arrived in February, after Bowie had concluded that the Alamo was a strategic outpost that should be manned and defended. William Travis came as well. As a leader in the war movement, he had earned the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Texan Army. He and Bowie shared command of the Alamo. As the garrison grew to about 150 men, waiting for the Mexican armies they knew would be coming. But contrary to all expectations, Santa Anna had not waited until spring to launch his counterattack. He had already gathered his soldiers and begun the grueling 600-mile forced march across Mexico's northern deserts in late December 1835.
Santa Anna loved to brag that his army suffered greatly, that they knew how to suffer. And I believe that. I believe that his soldiers knew how to suffer. He made sure they did.
As many as 500 troops were lost along the way, but the forced march paid off. Centralist soldiers arrived in San Antonio de Bejar on February 23, 1836, weeks before they were expected. The Texas rebels headed into the Alamo for safety, and the die was cast for the battle to come. The Battle of the Alamo climaxed in a fury of deadly violence in the pre-dawn hours of March 6, 1836. But that was only part of the story. Manning the Alamo were about 150 defenders, an odd mix that included Europeans and Tejanos, but the majority were Americans, most of them illegal immigrants who had arrived in Texas only weeks before the siege.
The Alamo defenders were not, most of them were not colonists, were people that had just arrived to support the war, to get some land, and to get the independence and annexation of Texas to the United States. So they were not offending freedom or anything like that.
But before there was a battle at the Alamo, there was a siege. It began on February 23, 1836, when the Mexicans hung a red flag at the top of San Antonio's San Fernando Church. Visible from the Alamo, it was the flag of no quarter, a well-recognized military signal, and a blunt message from the Mexicans: surrender now, or every last defender will be put to the sword.
It was very important to get the Alamo back, because it was Mexican territory, and they were illegals and people that were defying Mexican government.
Even for the Mexicans as well. They were fighting in defense of their country against an armed invasion, and here at the Alamo, they had an opportunity to break the will of this insurrection. And at this point, that's what it was, an insurrection.
The men of the Alamo responded with a defiant statement of their own. Firing a single cannon shot, the bravado of the Texans was made perfectly clear. They intended to stay and fight. The old mission was never built for military use, but its protection seemed adequate, at least at the start of the siege. About 17 cannons were scattered at various positions. Riflemen did not have the loopholes and other firing ports found in a proper fortress, but the Texans could safely lay low in the thick walls as they aimed rifles at Mexican troops, still hundreds of yards distant. As the siege began, the Texans effectively lost one of their most charismatic leaders. Jim Bowie was suddenly bedridden by illness, thought to be advanced tuberculosis. The most fearless Texian of them all would no longer be a factor at the Alamo. Command of the men fell to William Barry Travis alone. The young lawyer from Alabama who so advocated war for Texas independence now confronted the fight of his life.
He's still only 26. A man at that age today in the United States, in some places, would have to show ID just to buy cigarettes. Yet he's in command of the Alamo at that age. He's come a long, long way.
Outside the walls, General Santa Anna put his cannons to work, knowing the Alamo could not be taken immediately, and that time was on his side.
Santa Anna and his officers carry out a European-style siege that takes nearly 2 weeks to complete, with the final battle being what people remember as the Battle of the Alamo.
On the first day of the siege, Mexican troops were lined up on the banks of the San Antonio River, across from the Alamo. Santa Anna's cannons slowly battered away at the walls of the fort. It was military state-of-the-art for 1836, from a man who called himself the Napoleon of the West. On February 23rd, as the siege began, Travis wrote the first of several letters that couriers sneaking out of the Alamo would carry. He addressed it to his fellow citizens and compatriots and pledged victory or death. But he also made an urgent plea for reinforcements.
They knew that they could not hold that fort indefinitely. The men of the Alamo did not want to die gloriously. They wanted to live profitably. So the deal was, we will hold this place till the rest of Texas can join us. And you can tell from every letter that Travis writes from the Alamo, every letter is a plea. Okay, guys, they're here now. We really could use your help. Now would be a good time.
Travis wrote his letters to Texas provisional government. He waited for relief, but he never received a reply. The governmental council was 100 miles away. So was the Texian military leader, General Sam Houston. There was wide disagreement on how to defend against the Mexicans, and so nothing was done at all.
Why didn't the Texians go to the assistance of the Alamo? Well, the sad fact is, and this is part of the Alamo story that's rarely told, the Texian government that would have organized those relief efforts had fallen apart in dissension and discord.
February 25th, day 3. Santa Anna launched an infantry attack against the Alamo south wall. The Texans, well protected in the fort, easily repulsed the raid, inflicting a number of casualties. And already Crockett proved his value, his magnetic personality inspiring the defenders to fight ferociously. As Travis wrote, the Honorable David Crockett was seen at all points, animating the men to do their duty. However, in the cold calculus of war, the day belonged to the Mexicans.
The attack on the 25th is an advance on the part of Santa Anna. He is on the Texian side of the river, and he controls the Gonzales Road.
Despite Mexican control of the roads, the Tejano patriot Juan Seguin slipped out that night with another dispatch from Travis, again urging other Texas communities to send reinforcements. Seguin's mission kept him away from the Alamo, and the final battle took place. However, as the days passed, Alamo couriers faced increasing danger. From his newly won spot on the Texan side of the river, Santa Anna expanded his siege around the Alamo.
What he's going to do is encircle the Alamo. At least he tries to do that. Now, whether he's consciously letting courier traffic in and out in order to bring as many people as he can into the trap, we don't know.
As he strengthened his chokehold on the Alamo, Santa Anna continued his bombardment of its walls. The arcane Napoleonic art of reducing walls into piles of rubble is difficult to imagine in the 21st century, unless you design and build a full-scale fortress wall. This run of stonework approximates the height and thickness of the Alamo walls. It was built in Texas by a modern-day contractor, cannonballs, close to the size used by Santa Anna at the Alamo, will be fired at the test wall. The cannon is placed a little over 200 yards away, just outside the range of Texan riflemen at the Alamo. Then the test of cannon versus wall gets underway. The first shot hits the lower right corner, lodging more than 1.5 feet inside the wall. Compared to modern explosive shells, the cannonball does little damage. That's why a siege, like that at the Alamo, took so long.
When the projectile hits the wall, you might get some broken rocks and things like that. The whole idea is over weeks, perhaps months, to break a hole in the wall. The problem is the defenders at night, when you can't see them, are filling the wall in again.
If the defenders worked through the night fixing damaged walls, they would need to sleep during the day, when the cannon fire started all over again. For the sleepless Texans, it was a vicious cycle. On March 1st, day 8 of the siege, reinforcements arrived. Under cover of darkness, 32 men sneaked into the Alamo. They came from nearby Gonzales, the town where the war had started with a defiant banner and a cannon shot. The new troops, however few, gave the beleaguered Travis a glimmer of hope.
I think Travis's goal is to gather as many Texians as he can into the Alamo and at least, at the very least, delay the army, if not defeat the army.
Altogether, as many as 100 men made it into the Alamo during the siege, bringing the garrison's strength to 250. In light of the scant reinforcements, on March 3rd, the 10th day of the siege, Travis wrote another of his letters to the outside world, but now his defiant tone gave way to bitterness.
He says, look, I'm going to stay here, and my men are going to stay here, and we may well die here. And he said, our bones will reproach our countrymen for their neglect.
On day 12 of the siege, March 5th, Santa Anna decided to bring it to an end. He announced a time for the final assault on the Alamo, the next morning at 5 a.m. He met with his officers to lay out the plan. Soldiers were ordered to scale the Alamo walls at any cost. No prisoners were to be taken. All the Alamo defenders must die. And Santa Anna would take his breakfast inside the captured fort. On the afternoon before the final battle, Santa Anna called a halt to the artillery bombardment. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, the ragged Alamo defenders could finally rest. But even as the Texans drifted off to sleep, Mexican soldiers quietly took their battle positions. In a few hours, both sides would rise to the call of war and fight the epic Alamo battle, making history as well as legend. The long 2-week siege of the Alamo failed to inflict any casualties on the Texans. As many as 250 defenders remained inside when the final battle began quietly at 5 a.m. on March 6, 1836. In the darkness, 1,800 Mexican soldiers waited in their attack positions, just 100 yards from the Alamo walls. The Mexican artillery was silent, and inside the Alamo, weary Texans were having their first undisturbed sleep in nearly 2 weeks. Santa Anna prepared to give the command that would unleash the attack. However, in one of the few failures of Santa Anna's battle plan, an anxious soldier began to shout before the order was given. The shout spread, bugles sounded, and the troops advanced. The noise caused the Mexicans to lose some of the surprise they hoped for. Within the Alamo, Texans awakened to the clamor of war. Travis routed his men to the walls, and the fierce fighting began. 25 men attacked the south wall. More than 400 soldiers charged in from the east. Nearly 800 attacked the north wall in the northwest corner. Inside the walls, Jim Bowie remained on his sickbed. He was too ill to take part in the fighting at all. Davy Crockett led a group of defenders at the Alamo's south wall, successfully fending off the Mexican attack there. William Travis rushed to the north wall with his slave Joe fighting alongside him. A moment later, Travis was dead. He had been a leader in the movement to fight for Texas independence. Now, his war was over.
It's Joe who sees his master go down with a bullet to the head. But after that, Joe later says that he simply goes and hides and takes no further part in the actual battle itself, since he doesn't really have a stake in it. Regardless of who wins, he's still a slave. Joe simply looks out for himself.
Though Travis was killed early in the battle, the Alamo defenders fought on without their commander. Skilled Texan riflemen mounted the walls, pouring fire on the Mexicans as fast as they could. Cannons loaded with rusty chains, nails, and other scraps pounded the invading columns with deadly effect. And for a time, the attack stalled. But Santa Anna had 400 fresh soldiers in reserve, and he sent them against the north wall. Now the sheer force of numbers overwhelmed the Texans as Mexican troops neared the top.
No military plan survives contact with the enemy. Santa Anna is no different. But his plan must have been somewhat solid as well as his preparation, because it only takes a half hour once the attack is commenced for the Mexicans to breach the Alamo's defenses.
Those defenses were nothing more than the Alamo's thick walls, which now proved fatal to the Texan riflemen. With the Mexicans on the ground below, the Texans had to stand up to fire their rifles, making them easy targets for enemy muskets. Another problem for the Texans was the sheer size of the Alamo. Its perimeter walls stretched a quarter of a mile. If the defenders were stationed evenly around the compound, there would be only one every 7 feet, a mere 33 on the north wall. But the Mexicans had more than a numerical advantage. The American version of the Alamo story often overlooks the professionalism of Santa Anna's army, perhaps the battle's most important factor.
Texians brought a knife to a gunfight, and the Mexican army has been very active for about the past 18 months. They know what they're doing. It's a tough army to beat.
Soon after the north wall defenses collapsed, the west wall was breached, and Mexican soldiers poured into the Alamo from two sides. The surviving Texans fell back to their second line of defense, the long barracks on the east side of the Alamo. Outside, in the courtyard, Mexican soldiers discovered the Alamo defenders had neglected to disable the fort's artillery. It was a costly error. The invading troops turned the Texans' own cannons back toward the long barracks. What should have been a refuge became a death trap. A few Texans inside the barracks waved white flags of surrender, but other Texans had no intention of surrendering and continued to fire. Taking fire under a white flag, the Mexicans were enraged and rushed inside to finish the job with pistols and bayonets, killing everyone, taking no prisoners. Eventually, they came upon Jim Bowie.
One Mexican account we have that deals with his death says that he was found hiding under a blanket. The Mexicans thought he was hiding. In fact, he was probably too sick to get up from his blanket. And so his death was not so much a death in battle as a simple execution.
Jim Bowie died from several gunshots to the head. He was a man whose bravery and personal magnetism helped rally support to the Texas war movement. But his death was far from glorious. Davy Crockett was said to be among the last to fall. Though whether he died fighting or was executed is a matter still open to question. There was killing outside the Alamo as well. Some 40 to 60 Texans made a dash for safety, but were cut down by Santa Anna's waiting cavalry. By 6:30 a.m., Santa Anna's final attack had begun, the battle was over. Dawn revealed a surreal landscape of broken bodies and smoking ruins. The Tejanos, the Europeans, the American volunteers, the Gonzales 32 were dead. Like most wars, the Alamo battle was drenched in the blood of its soldiers and uplifted by their sacrifice. But it's not known exactly how many died on either side. Few conflicts, in fact, come to us so draped in mystery, twisted by distortions and riddled with questions. How did Davy Crockett really die? Was Santa Anna's victory more costly than defeat? And is the true story of the Alamo still waiting to be found? The distortion of Alamo history began even before the smoke had lifted from the battlefield. With the fighting ended, Santa Anna dictated a letter to his Secretary of War, in which he boasted of killing 600 Alamo defenders.
Santa Anna inflates the number of Alamo slain to a ridiculously high level. In fact, his private secretary, Ramon Caro, later says, well, I knew this was ridiculous when I wrote it, but what are you going to do? He's the president of Mexico. He gives me the number, he says, write it. So we know that Santa Anna's numbers are not right.
Other, more objective Mexican sources put the number at around 250, a figure most historians accept as accurate. Many of the names of the Texan dead are inscribed on a monument in San Antonio, known as the Alamo Cenotaph. Only 189 have been identified. The others are the unknown soldiers of the battle.
And we desperately would like to know the names. We probably will never know the names of all the men who died inside the Alamo.
The Mexican losses have also been distorted in some accounts of the story.
The numbers of Mexican casualties have been inflated to a ridiculous level.
So, that is the story of the battle. Now, after that, we have the map of Mexico. Now, what will happen is Mexico will eventually become an independent republic. They want to join the United States, but for a while they are rebel. So they will be independent. Sam Houston is elected the first president of Texas, and it is recognized by England and France, but not Mexico. The goal here is England and France wants to use Mexico as a puppet state, as a buffer between Mexico and the United States. And hopefully, one of them would be able to use this as a way of gaining territory in the United States. Maybe Mexico will become a French or English protectorate. John Tyler, who was president of the United States, wants to become wants to annex Texas to reinvent his presidency. Secretary of State Calhoun made the issue of annexation about slavery, not nationalism, and as a result, when it was thought that adding Texas to the Union would increase slave territory, it failed. So the treaty to annex Texas fails. Eventually, a joint resolution will pass, and Texas does become part of the United States in 1845. Now, the next piece of land that we will obtain during this period is that of Oregon in California. So we're now starting to slowly get Mexico. And by the way, when you look at this map, this area, the yellow area, is the part of Texas that Mexico is willing to claim is part of the United States. And there's another river here, there's the Rio Grande, but there's another river over here called the Brazos River. And Mexico claims the Brazos River is the border. America claims it's the Rio Grande. And that distinction is what is going to eventually create the dispute that will lead to the Mexican War. But the next thing is Oregon and California. Now, what is important is fur trade and mountain men. Now, when I was out west in Montana, I bought a book, which I haven't read yet, but about one of the most important mountain men. His name was Jim Bridger. He was a scout who will lead the Lewis and Clark expedition and head on into what is now Yellowstone National Park. Another is Kit Carson, and he will also be important as an explorer of the West. The Santa Fe Trail connected Santa Fe to St. Louis through Independence, Missouri, and Independence is seen as the starting off point for a bunch of the trails into the West, whether it was the Santa Fe Trail, the Mormon Trail, the California Trail, and various other trails. The Army will also explore the West. One of the more important is this man, Zebulon Pike. Anyone know of a mountain named for him? Pikes Peak, that's right, correct, yes. Another early one of these leaders is Major Stephen Long. Now, Long's Peak is in Rocky Mountain National Park. That's a little further north than Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak is famous because it is the first, it's not the tallest peak, it is the first 14,000 foot peak in Colorado as you're going west. So it is the closest east of any of them and is easiest to get to, and that's what's made it so popular. John C. Fremont is another explorer of the West. He was also an ambitious Republican who will marry the daughter of a senator from Missouri and will eventually be the first Republican nominee for President of the United States, and nearly won in 1856. Almost won the presidency in 1856. The Oregon Trail is very important. Missionaries were the first to travel to Oregon. They settled in the Willamette Valley. And if anyone's ever read the story Seven Alone, about a family that was heading out west on the Oregon Trail, and eventually the father dies, and then the mother dies, and the children are all by themselves. I think they're the Sager family. It's a book, sort of a historical novel, but it's based on real people, and a movie. It is very fascinating. But traveling west in these wagons was very difficult. And between 1840 and 1860, some 300,000 people crossed the Great Plains in wagon caravans that included more than 100 wagons. And if you got separated or whatever, you could easily succumb to the weather. Have any of you read the Little House books?
I've listened to them.
Listen to them. There's an episode, I think, in Little House on the Prairie at the end of the book when they're leaving Kansas and you're kind of left hanging. You're not sure what's going to happen to them. In reality, they're going to Missouri or somewhere, which doesn't show up in the books at all. But they meet a family that unfortunately didn't tie up their horses properly, and the horses ran away, and they're just sitting there on their wagon, not sure what to do. And Paul is willing to help them by taking them somewhere to get help, but they don't want to leave all their stuff there on the wagon. and eventually they have to leave them because they are just unable to cope. Now, in reality, Charles Ingalls, in actuality, was not the greatest pioneer. But there were lots of people who were just not cut out for this kind of life, and they wanted to go west or whatever, but they were not ambitious, or they were not clever enough, or they weren't whatever, and they lost their ability to keep track of those things. Sometimes these trips would take 6 months or more, and there was much hardship and attacks by Indians, accidents along the way. The far west was coveted by expansionist politicians, and one of these politicians was this man, James K. Polk. Now, James K. Polk, interestingly, was a dark horse candidate, which means it's a person who was nominated that no one really knew. And who knows, we might find the Democrats are going to nominate a dark horse candidate this year, too. Especially if President Biden decides not to run. I think with the Republicans not winning like they could have yesterday, he will continue to be the Democratic nominee. Now, the Whigs in 1844, President Tyler thought of running as an independent, but he doesn't. And so, guess who the Whigs nominate? The moderate from Kentucky, who really wants to be president. Henry Clay, who always gets nominated at the wrong time. His vice president is Theodore Freundlichen. Isn't that a great name for a politician? He's a congressman from New Jersey for vice president. Henry Clay is a person who owns slaves but is open to the idea of abolition. He's trying to play both sides of every issue, and that gets him into trouble in this campaign. The Democrats had a rule that a 2/3 majority was needed to nominate someone for president. Martin Van Buren, the former president, was expected to get the Democratic nomination. He does earn a majority of the vote on the first ballot, and the second ballot, and the third ballot, and the fourth ballot, and the fifth ballot, and so on. But it's clear that he will never have the support to get 2/3 of the delegates to nominate him. On the eighth ballot, James K. Polk enters the race. He actually came to the convention as a delegate, hoping he might get nominated for vice president. On the ninth ballot, he wins. He comes away as the nominee. And in the end, he will win. No one really knew who he was, but he got elected. Now, he was a politician. He was a senator, a congressman, Speaker of the House, and also governor of Tennessee. So locally, he was very popular. Okay. We'll see you next time. Now,